The Barn of Screams, Ruth Coleman's Revenge. The screams echoed through the abandoned barn for exactly 14 hours and 23 minutes. That's what county records once showed in Rutherford County, North Carolina, records that, mysteriously, vanished from courthouse archives in 1923. What happened on that October morning in 1841 would become one of the most disturbing cases of revenge in American history. And yet, the story was deliberately buried, hidden by local authorities who deemed it too horrific for the public to ever know. This is the story of Ruth Coleman, a 24-year-old enslaved woman who, after 7 years of unimaginable cruelty, finally snapped. And what she did to her master in those final hours would horrify even the hardened men who later discovered the scene. The truth of what unfolded inside that barn remained hidden for over a century and 80 years, until now. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss these hidden chapters of American history. And comment below, where are you watching from? Because stories like Ruth's didn't just happen here in North Carolina, they happened everywhere, buried in courthouse basements, locked inside sealed testimonies, and whispered through family records across the nation. Today, we're opening one of those sealed chapters. What you're about to hear comes from personal letters, medical examiner notes, and testimonies sealed by court order. This is the unfiltered account of how one woman's breaking point became the most calculated act of vengeance ever recorded in the antebellum South. Rutherford County in 1841 was a place where tobacco ruled everything. The rolling hills of western North Carolina were perfect for growing the golden leaf that made men wealthy and rendered others expendable. Small farms dotted the landscape, most of them worked by enslaved labor. In some areas, enslaved people outnumbered their owners 3-1. It was a powder keg of tension, all hidden behind the genteel mask of Southern hospitality. 7 miles outside of town, on an isolated stretch of farmland, sat the Crenshaw property. The farm had been inherited in 1832 by William Crenshaw, along with 12 enslaved individuals. Locals described him with the euphemism of the time, a demanding master, but those who knew him understood the truth. William Crenshaw was something far worse. By 1841, William Crenshaw was 38 years old, a man consumed by rage and disappointment. His tobacco crops underperformed year after year. His attempt at planting cotton failed miserably, and in 1837, his wife died, leaving him bitter, isolated, and with complete unchecked power over the people he enslaved. Physically, Crenshaw cut an intimidating figure, 6 feet tall, shoulders broad from years of field work, calloused hands, and cold gray eyes that never stopped searching for flaws in others. Locals feared him, his workers dreaded him, and for one young woman in particular, William Crenshaw became the embodiment of cruelty. Ruth Coleman was born on the Crenshaw property in 1817. Her mother, Sarah, worked in the main house, raising Ruth with as much love and protection as the brutal system of slavery allowed. For Ruth, childhood meant small chores, learning household skills, and slowly realizing her place in a world designed to keep her powerless. But everything changed when Ruth turned 17. That was the year William's wife died. With no woman to run the household, Ruth was moved from the fields into the main house. She was smart, capable, and tragically, exactly the kind of person William Crenshaw's twisted mind would fixate upon. Ruth could read, having quietly learned from the Crenshaw children. She could manage accounts, organize supplies, and run a household with precision. She should have been valued. Instead, her intelligence and competence became fuel for William's resentment. The abuse began with impossible standards. Ruth polished silver for hours, only to be told it was still tarnished. She cooked meals exactly as he demanded, only to be accused of using too much or too little salt. He insulted her appearance, her intelligence, her very existence. But William Crenshaw's cruelty was calculated. He rarely struck where bruises could be seen. He never damaged her hands. He needed them functional. Instead, he created a system of punishment. A kick to her lower back, leaving her in pain for days. A twisted arm, throbbing whenever she lifted. Slaps across the shoulders, stinging but invisible. And his psychological warfare was worse. He promised her small freedoms, only to snatch them away. He dangled better food, then fed it to his dogs. He told her she could see her mother, then denied it at the last moment. By studying her reactions, William learned which hopes to raise and how best to crush them. In 1840, Ruth's mother Sarah died. With her passing, Ruth lost the last source of comfort and family she had. She was now alone in the house with a man whose cruelty only escalated. The others on the farm, men like Moses, the 52-year-old who had survived decades of slavery, knew what was happening, but they also knew that stepping in would only make things worse. By spring of 1841, Ruth had changed. The smile that once defined her was gone. Her face became a mask, expressionless, efficient. She learned to anticipate William's moods. She shifted her body so blows landed where they would heal quickly. She adapted, but beneath the silence, something else was growing. Hatred, pure, focused, and patient. Ruth began studying William the way he had studied her. She noted his limp, the way he favored his left leg. She saw his unease around fire. She memorized every insult, every blow, every moment of humiliation, like ammunition for a war not yet declared. And that war would begin on an ordinary Tuesday morning, October 15th, 1841. October 15th, 1841, began like countless mornings before it. Ruth rose before dawn, moving silently across the wooden floors of the Crenshaw home. She prepared William's breakfast exactly as he demanded: eggs, bacon, cornbread, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. By 6:30 a.m., William appeared, boots already stained with mud from inspecting the drying sheds. His sharp gray eyes swept over the table, searching for flaws. Finding none, he turned his attention to Ruth. "Your hair looks like a bird's nest," he snapped. "Did you even try to make yourself presentable?" Ruth kept her gaze down. "Yes, sir. I apologize if it's not to your satisfaction. It's not." He dropped heavily into his chair, the wood scraping against the floor. "A man shouldn't have to look at such slovenliness while he eats. Fix it." Ruth adjusted her hair in the small mirror by the window. Behind her, William stabbed at his food with unusual aggression. Moments later, his voice cut through the silence. "The eggs are overcooked." Ruth froze. She had made them exactly the way he liked. "Sir, I prepared them the same way as always." The plate shattered against the wall, just inches from her head. Ceramic shards and food rained down. A sliver of pottery grazed her cheek. William's voice dropped to that deadly quiet tone that always signaled danger. "Are you questioning my judgment?" Ruth dropped to her knees, gathering the fragments with trembling hands. "No, sir." "I'm sorry, sir. You made me waste good food because you can't follow simple instructions." His boots crunched on the broken plate as he loomed over her. But today was different. Today, something in William's mind snapped. 7 years of resentment, frustration, and cruelty coalesced into a single conclusion. Ruth was the cause of all his failures, and he intended to remind her of her place. "Stand up," he ordered. Ruth rose, still clutching pieces of the broken plate. "Put that down and follow me." They crossed the yard in silence. Dew soaked Ruth's thin cotton dress as the October air bit at her skin. William led her to the largest barn, a dim, cavernous space filled with the scent of drying tobacco and cold iron. Sunlight leaked in through cracks in the walls, casting stripes of light across ropes, pulleys, and wooden beams. He stopped in the center where a system of ropes lifted heavy bales to the loft. He pulled one rope taut, testing its strength. "You think you're clever, don't you?" His voice echoed. "You think I don't see the way you look at me? 7 years I've fed you, clothed you, given you shelter. And how do you repay me? With disrespect." With incompetence, Ruth stood still, head down. She knew there was no safe answer. "Maybe it's time you learned humility." William paced in a slow circle around her. "Maybe it's time you understood how much your comfort depends on my generosity." He held up the rope. "I should string you up for a few hours. Let you think about how grateful you ought to be." And then, something inside Ruth shattered. "Grateful," she whispered. William froze. What did you say? Ruth raised her eyes and met his gaze directly, for the first time in months. I said, grateful. The silence was electric. William's face twisted with rage. He dropped the rope, fists curling. You ungrateful. But before he could finish, Ruth moved. As William lunged, Ruth sidestepped and shoved with all her strength. He stumbled into a support beam, cursing as he spun back toward her. But Ruth was already reaching for the heavy wooden mallet leaning against the wall. She swung, not at him, but at the rope mechanism, holding the massive crossbeam overhead. The first blow loosened it. The second set it free. William had only a moment to raise his arms before the 300-pound beam came crashing down. It struck just below his knees with a sickening crunch. His scream tore through the barn, raw, animal, endless. When the dust settled, William lay pinned beneath the beam, his legs grotesquely twisted. His gray eyes, wide with shock and horror, locked on Ruth. "Help me," he whispered. "Please, help me." Ruth stood motionless, mallet still in hand. In that instant, the balance of power, the balance that had defined every second of her adult life, shifted forever. "Help me," William cried again, louder, panic flooding his voice. Ruth set the mallet down. She stepped closer. When she spoke, her tone was calm, almost gentle. "You want me to help you?" "Yes," he gasped. "Please, we can work something out." "I'll change. I promise." Ruth knelt beside him. For the first time in 7 years, William Crenshaw looked at her not as property, but as someone whose choice determined his fate. "I don't think I will," Ruth said softly. Fear spread across William's face as the realization sank in. His life was no longer his own, and that was the moment Ruth Coleman's revenge truly began. The ledger of suffering and Ruth's lessons.
William gasped, his face pale, sweat dripping down despite the October chill. "My legs. I can't feel my legs." Ruth circled slowly, examining the fallen beam as if it were a household chore she'd been assigned. Her voice was cool, matter of fact. "They're broken. Multiple fractures. But you won't bleed out. Not yet. Go get help. Moses, the others. They can lift this." Ruth shook her head. "Moses is in the far fields. He won't be back until evening. The others too. Then ride to town. Bring Dr. Harrison." "That's 15 miles round trip," Ruth said, pausing to meet his eyes. "On foot, it would take me all day." "Take the horse!" His voice cracked, desperation spilling out. Ruth tilted her head, studying him like an insect pinned to a board. "You know, in 7 years you've never once said please to me unless you were in pain. Interesting how quickly that changes when the roles reverse." 10. William tried to steady his voice. "Ruth, please. Whatever you think I've done." "Whatever I think?" Ruth cut him off. She walked to a workbench, her fingers brushing across the tools. She picked up a crowbar, testing its weight. "Let me tell you a story," she said, "about a little girl. She thought if she was good enough, smart enough, maybe the man who owned her would treat her with kindness." She knelt beside him, close enough for him to see her expression. "She learned to read. She learned to cook and sew. She never complained, never talked back. She believed her worth might protect her." Ruth shifted a few planks of debris around his crushed legs. Not enough to free him, just enough to increase pressure. William groaned in agony. "And do you know what happened to that little girl?" Ruth's voice softened to a sing-song. "She died. Slowly. Over 7 years. Until all that was left was someone who understands exactly how much pain one person can inflict on another." 11. Ruth reached into her dress pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. She held it up between 2 fingers. "Do you know what this is?" William squinted. "No." "This." Ruth returned the list to her pocket and picked up a pair of long-handled pliers. She turned them in her hands thoughtfully. "Here's what's going to happen," she said calmly. I'm going to free you, slowly, carefully, and while I work, you will apologize for each entry on my list. Not quick apologies, not meaningless words, real ones. William's face brightened with fragile hope. Yes, of course. I'll apologize. I'm sorry for everything. Truly. Ruth shook her head and smiled, though the smile was colder than any glare. Oh no, you taught me better than that. Apologies under duress aren't apologies. They're just words to stop pain. You made me apologize for things that weren't my fault. Remember? She adjusted the debris pressing against his legs, not to ease the weight, but to redirect it, creating new pressure points. William screamed. Let's start with entry number 1, Ruth said, sitting back down. The dropped spoon. Ruth had learned from William himself that pain alone wasn't the greatest torture. Hope was. Anticipation was. Every 30 minutes, she brought him water. Cool, clean, life-saving water. She held the ladle to his lips, let him drink deeply, then set it just out of reach. You see, she'd say softly, this is kindness. This is how people should treat one another. Do you like it? And the moment gratitude flickered in his eyes, she would resume the torment. She used insects she knew terrified him, spiders, beetles, guiding them near his face. My mother was afraid too, she whispered, afraid of dying alone, afraid she had been forgotten. Can you imagine that fear? Each cruelty was tailored to an entry on her list. Each apology extracted with surgical precision. Apologies that didn't satisfy her led to repetition. By midday, William was breaking. His voice cracked. His promises became frantic bargains. I'll free you. I'll free everyone. I'll give you land. As the barn filled with golden shafts of evening sunlight, Ruth pulled another bundle of papers from her pocket. You remember when you made me burn my letters? She asked. William's face twisted with panic. Please, not that. Ruth held up the pages. You thought you destroyed them all, but I never stopped writing. I just got better at hiding them. These weren't letters to her mother. These were addressed to him. Letters she had written in secret, pouring out her darkest thoughts, her fantasies of reversal. She unfolded one dated just the week before. Dear Master Crenshaw, today you kicked me for spilling flour. As I cleaned, I imagined you helpless beneath me, begging for mercy. I imagined your eyes when you realized your life depended entirely on my whim. She folded the paper with deliberate care. Back then it was just fantasy, but here we are. And reality, I must say, is much more satisfying. As sunset approached, Ruth began what she called the final examination. She removed pieces of debris, not to free him, but to shift the weight in new, unbearable ways. Each adjustment gave William a fleeting moment of hope, followed by crushing agony. You taught me, Ruth said, her tone almost tender, that hope is the cruelest torture. Every time you dangled freedom or kindness or mercy and then snatched it away, you broke me a little more. So I'll give you the same gift. Hope. And then I'll take it. William sobbed, his words incoherent. Promises, apologies,
prayers, all spilling out into the dust of the barn floor. Ruth leaned close, whispering, "Do you feel it? That moment when hope dies? That is the pain I lived with every day." By now, William was a husk of the man he had been that morning. His body mangled, his spirit shattered. Ruth consulted her list one final time. "One last entry," she said. "October 15th, 1841. William Crenshaw learned what it means to be at the mercy."
Moments later, Moses and the field hands returned from their day's labor. Ruth met them at the door, her hands folded. "There's been an accident," she said. "Master Crenshaw was working in the barn when a beam fell. I tried to help, but it was too heavy." Moses looked at her, then at the barn. He had survived 30 years of slavery by knowing when not to ask questions. He nodded. Together the men cleared the debris. They uncovered William's body, still warm. No one mentioned that Ruth's story didn't match the evidence. No one asked why she seemed so calm. 3 days later, William Crenshaw was buried in the family cemetery. 6 weeks later, the property was sold at auction. Ruth, along with the other enslaved workers, was purchased by a neighboring farmer, Thomas Garrett, a man known for his relative fairness. Under Garrett's ownership, Ruth resumed her duties. She worked efficiently, spoke more freely, smiled more often. But those who knew her noticed something deeper, a dignity that could not be shaken.